The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
Welcome to a special edition of Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association. I'm Woody Evans, and our guest today is Dr. Kenneth R. Garren, who's president of Lynchburg College. President Garren earned his BA, MA, and PhD in mathematics from Roanoke College, William & Mary, and Virginia Tech. He is in his 16th year as president at Lynchburg College. Garren is in his 50th year in higher education as Vice President, Chief Academic Officer, and Professor of Math. Prior to his academic career, he served for 5 years with the United States Space Program, working on the Apollo project at NASA Langley Research Center. His military career began during high school as a private in the 29th Infantry Division, Virginia Army National Guard, and concluded with his retirement as Colonel Infantry, the United States Army Reserve. Military positions included command as Lieutenant Colonel of a Drill Sergeant Battalion in West Virginia, and for 6 years he served as consulting faculty member with the Masters of Arts in Military Science degree program at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. He has served on local, state, regional, and national boards, including the Commission of Colleges, Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, and the Advisory Council of the Foundation for Independent Higher Education. He is the immediate past chair of the Council of College and University Presidents of the Christian Church. He currently serves on the Board of Directors of the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, the National Lobbying Group for Independent Higher Education based in Washington, D.C. He also happens to hold a black belt in martial arts and is a dancer, hip-hop and Gangnam Style. Welcome, Dr. Garren. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Woody.
Well, you're in Richmond. We're here in the basement of the General Assembly this morning. Tell us what you're doing here in Richmond.
Well, the primary thing in Richmond with our independent colleges is to continue to thank people for their support here for providing the Virginia Tuition Assistance Grants for the independent schools. We know that's so important. We know that scholarships are the answer to so many things. And one of the best examples of that comes from my own personal life. My brother and I were students at Highland Springs High School here in Henrico County. And during my brother's senior year, his chemistry teacher became ill for 3 weeks, and the principal, who was also a chemist, came in and taught his class. At that same time, the University of Richmond announced that it was going to give some regional competitive scholarships, and the principals and the leaders of the local high schools were told to select your top students, prepare them in the next few weeks, because we're going to give them an examination, and the winners will get a scholarship to University of Richmond. Well, my brother was working 20 hours a week. I came from a fairly economically deprived family, and so his grades were not very good. And he would not have been selected to take this exam except that the principal who had been teaching his chemistry class said, "I want Johnny Garren to take those tests." Well, the big joke around Highland Springs was, for the next few weeks, while these students were being prepared, wouldn't it be funny if Johnny Garren won that scholarship to University of Richmond? Well, guess what? Johnny Garren did win that scholarship to the University of Richmond, went on to graduate Phi Beta Kappa in physics, went on to the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Langley Research Center, and that's where little Kenny G followed him down 3 years after graduation himself, and had his entire career there. But subsequently, his children went to college. My 3 children all got their doctoral degrees, and now I've got 8 grandchildren that are coming on the way up. So the real point here is that aid to students can change lives, and not just for that student, but in this case it's going to be at least for 3 generations or one scholarship from the University of Richmond. So the strongest thing we come here is to support TAG, and even nationally, the belief is that the funding for schools should follow the students, and let the students select the school that they want to go to, and then whether it's federal aid or Virginia tuition assistance grant, then they can go to the school that they want to. So I think Virginia has really set the kind of example of including the independent schools into the total educational picture. Nationally, 20% of the students are enrolled in independent private colleges.
20%.
20%. And in Virginia, I think it's over 30% of the students are enrolled in independent schools. So the aid that we get, even though it's small compared to what the public schools, for example, the public colleges will get 96% from the higher education budget. The independent colleges get 4%. We are such a bargain, and I'm not speaking now just for Lynchburg College, but for all the private colleges in Virginia. We will educate someone with $3,200, and I understand now it might be $3,300 for next year. For the public schools, the higher education budget is approximately $7,000 per student. But then that does not include the capital cost. When we need a new building at Lynchburg College, little Kenny G is out on the road with his tin cup, getting support from alums and foundations and so on. The public institutions, much good money has been invested in providing facilities for them. Now, what I would wish for the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia and the legislators to think about is about how much more these independent schools could do in terms of having capacity and not having to build some more buildings on some of the large schools, but making more contractual relations with the independent schools to take schools, whether it's nursing or, for example, we have a program, Doctor of Physical Therapy degree program, that we started for the first time in 2010. We've graduated 4 classes of about 48 students each. We put that school together all with private money.
Private money.
Private money. Now, if you look at schools around us, I think Radford University is a very wonderful school. That was all publicly funded to create their program, to create their facilities, as well as the financial funding that went in for those students. Lynchburg College could have done that, has done that, but we can do it in other areas too. In the nursing areas, which the private schools put out a very large percentage of the nurses and the school teachers that are used in Virginia. The legislation is there that does allow the state to have private contractual relations with independent schools. So the plea there is to for everyone, the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia, who's always been a great supporter of our private schools, and our legislators who keep us in the game too, to keep watching out for us and realize how much we can do for higher education.
Tell us a little bit about Lynchburg College. I know you're located in Lynchburg, Virginia. You're close to Roanoke, Charlottesville, those areas. Tell us a little bit about the campus, the academics, sports, your student body and faculty.
Wow, okay. We are in Central Virginia, founded in 1903 by Josephus Hopwood, a Disciples of Christ minister who came down from Tennessee. And we were first founded as Virginia Christian College, changed a few years later, 1919, to Lynchburg College. And in about a week and a half, our Board of Trustees are going to try to decide whether or not we should take the name of the University of Lynchburg, because at this point we are classified by the Carnegie Foundation as a mid-size private university. So not a small private university, but a mid-size university. If you look at the population of the schools in the private schools, every school that is larger than us, the private school, is already a university, and there are 5 of those. If you look for those who have enrollment smaller than us, there are 8 of those that have the university status. If you look at the programs that we offer, we're very strong in the graduate programs, and I think, like I said, we have 21% of our students are graduate students. Maybe I didn't say that. 24% of our operating budget comes from, in fact, those graduate programs. But there are, as you look at the cross applicants, when students apply to Lynchburg College, we also know what other schools they apply to. If you look at the top 5 schools besides 2 undergraduate institutions that are universities, you have to get out to, again, Radford University before you get out to a school that's offering at the level and the number of graduate degree programs that Lynchburg College is offering. We have our Doctor of Physical Therapy, We have a doctorate in education, and we have a physician assistant that next year will turn into the doctor of medical science. So we'll have 3 of those. Radford has 3 of those. We have 16 master's degrees. My last count of Radford, they had 16 master's degrees as well. So in fact, we are a university. It's just the question of whether or not the Board of Trustees will decide whether or not we should use that in our name. Now, I'm recommending very strongly that we should, because the evidence points to the fact that people who are looking for graduate degree programs are more impressed by seeing the university name. It has a higher respect, I think, in general, but also international students. And we know there's a large international market, and in most countries, if you say college, that is like a high school or a junior college. In fact, I got an email from one of our faculty members the other day that said, "Hi, Dr. Perez, thank you for doing what you're doing. I sure hope they make the change, and it will let my friends in South America that know that I don't teach at a high school, because colegio in Spanish is the word for high school." I've been to Korea, to Hong Kong, to Japan. Last March, I was in India, and I will say, I'll jump back to the Korea example first, that several years ago, when I was extending a relationship with a university in South Korea, that the first time the president of that institution mentioned my school's name, it was Lynchburg College. For the rest of the time, he talked about Lynchburg University. When I was in India, I was back in India in March and really had a fantastic opportunity to do some things due to the great relationships that my graduate school dean has in India. Right off the airplane, that I got to the hotel at 3:30 in the morning, early the next morning, I'm laying a wreath on the tomb of Gandhi, something that's usually reserved for the presidents of countries and for prime ministers. I also had the opportunity to speak with the Nobel Peace Prize winner of 2014 that had saved 80,000 children from slavery. Had a half an hour to talk with him. But one of the major things I did was to go around to some of the colleges that were under the University of New Delhi in India and talk about the sustainability work that we're doing at the Lynchburg College. But in all of these cases, the reference was always to us as a university, because in all of the schools, when you're recruiting international students, in fact, it was interesting because I was coming home from a president's conference in Florida just a few weeks ago. And you know how if you hear your name or your school name, you turn around? Well, it so happens that behind us on the airplane was a young man. He said, Lynchburg College. And I turned around. He said, yes, I'm getting my doctor's degree there. Well, next to him was a young lady who was from Bermuda. And I asked her where she was going, and she said she was headed for Liberty University because the government was going to sponsor her to get a required doctorate in education. And I said, why don't you come to Lynchburg College? And she says, I didn't know colleges had graduate degrees. So I am hoping that as we position ourselves strategically for the future, as we're always looking for the appropriate programs in the future, that the board will decide that it's most appropriate to go to the university status. Now, we are looking at new programs. Even as I sit here, we're looking at a new cybersecurity program that will start in 1 year from now. And one of the faculty members who is going to help us generate that program is either going to be coming from India or going to be coming from the Netherlands. So we do a lot of relationship building. I was looking at, in fact, I have a slide that I show to our prospective students and parents that shows about 8 different countries where we've had in the last couple of years people from other countries coming to us to give talks and so on. And I have a list of, I think it's 12 international schools in other countries, Austria, Korea, and many others, where we have relationships of exchange of faculty and students. So we're dealing with a global society. You know, this world is a flat world, and we're preparing our students not to just live in New Jersey or Florida or Virginia, but to have be prepared for a global environment. And one of the most important ways they can do that is to study abroad. So we have a very strong study abroad program led by our faculty that goes in the springtime, during the January interterm, and in the summer. And but if not all students can afford to do study abroad. I wish we could do 100%, and a goal for Kenny G is that one day we'll have every student to go study abroad. But study abroad not to just a country that's like us, like England or something like that, but where there's really a different culture, because the lessons that they will learn from being a different culture, being immersed for several weeks even, will have an impact on them that they'll then understand that you must learn the cultures of other people with whom you're going to mix. One of the most important things for me in our most recent addition to our student center was to take care of the situation and do more in the area of diversity. For example, we had a fabulous building that I found out that most of our after class meetings of our diverse student body would be in rooms. They'd go in a room and close the door. Now we have a student building so that the students have these groups, the different affinity groups have to mix, because there will always be affinity groups. That's a natural thing. But we want those affinity groups to learn each other and learn how to get along with each other. So that's a big and important lesson for us. So even if we weren't, and generally, by the way, the international students will actually pay more to come to our school than the Virginia students are, which are, by the way, 69% of our student body, or people from New Jersey or Pennsylvania or North Carolina or where. But to me, it's worth it to be paying more to those international students to get them on our campus so that our students will mix with them in other international ways. So we've been operating 3 campuses, by the way. The one that I said founded in 1903 in Lynchburg. Then we have another campus that was founded in basically 1998. It's about 20 miles from campus at the foothills, the peaks of Otter. The beautiful Blue Ridge Mountain, Sharp Top and Flat Top are right within sight of it. But it's an almost 500 environmentally protected educational center. And we've been teaching programs out there other than just college and graduate programs, but K through 12. So the students in the surrounding counties will come out there and have environmental lessons taught to them by our staff and, in fact, by their own teachers. And there's a third campus we've been on since 2003, and that's the St. Lucia campus. But we continue to work in St. Lucia, and how we got to St. Lucia was we had a gentleman from Lynchburg College who graduated from there. Some years later was in a terrible automobile accident, realized he had a lot of problems in terms of being able to do things, returned to Lynchburg College because we have a national reputation in special education. So he came back and got a major in special education. He then went and joined the Peace Corps. His first assignment was St. Lucia. When he got to St. Lucia, he saw that there were no programs in special education. None of the teachers were trained. And so as a result, contacts were made with the Ministry of Education there, the World Bank, and with Lynchburg College. And for the next 3 summers, our faculty came down and taught 35 teachers who came from all over the island just to get special education certified. Well, that indeed led to more programs, and we ended up going down and teaching having a 1-week seminar for all of their school administrators, another 1-week seminar for all of the teachers on the island. And in fact, I was down there. My wife Sheila and I were down there last summer at a graduation ceremony, and we had 35 graduates. I think 18 of them were master's degrees, and 17 of them were getting bachelor's degrees. An exciting part for that was that the Prime Minister of the island, in his 3rd day on the job, came to our commencement ceremony. I had known him when he was 10 years before, when he was just a minister of tourism, and it's like, okay, Mr. Minister, I knew you when you were much lower than you are now. But he had me at his private residence in Castries the next day. And we talked about some other possibilities of programs that we might be doing in St. Lucia. I don't know if those are come to pass, and we've actually been making really discounted efforts of bringing St. Lucian students. After we got them through those like special education certifications, we had money left over from what had been given to us by the World Bank and so on. And what we did was we used that money to bring some students to our campus to get their bachelor's degrees. Several of them stayed on to get master's degrees, and 2 of them have stayed on to get their doctor's degrees. So we have taken the money that we received, even on a discounted phase, and plowed it back into the island, because that's the great story of Lynchburg College. It's service to others. It's service to other, and we have made a difference on that island. I don't know if we'll always stay down there, because now other programs are coming along, but we will always look to do. For example, in our own area, we do 70,000 hours a year of public service by our faculty, staff, and students. So we're one of the strongest, I would say, community-connected institutions that I've ever seen.
Wow, that is a great story, and of course you have very broad and deep responsibilities and duties. It's almost like being a mayor or a governor of a small town or a state, actually, and I know you also have a wealth of experience now as a result of some activities you had to pursue in Washington, D.C. a number of years ago. Talk to us about that experience and how the new administration may be something that you will pursue in terms of educational efforts going forward.
Okay, thank you for that question. Sometimes your life will take strange turns that you're never really thinking of. For me, it happened on August 22nd, 2013, when I read a document that came from Robert Gomez out of the White House, and it described a new program that the Department of Education was going to be in charge of, and it was to establish a educational scorecard for all of the colleges and universities in the United States. When I read the full document, I realized the plan that was in place and really the belief that it could not work fairly. It could not do the right thing. So I went to Washington and I had meetings scheduled with both Democrats and Republicans, our senior senator and our junior senator and our senior people, and Bob Goodlatte and so on. And it was difficult at first getting the appointments. So little Kenny G is very persistent when something is important need to be done. And so in fact I took some of those clips of, I was the hip hop dancer part. We have something called the Hornet Hop, and my wife and I do it to MC Hammer's You Can't Touch This or Will Smith's Wild Wild
So
West.
that's the mascot of the school.
That was the
Hornet.
mascot, right. And so I sent that clip that showed Sheila and me doing the hip hop victory dance. And it'd be kind of interesting that people, as staff members, look and say, hey, this guy might be kind of interesting to talk to. And so I'd keep calling back. I'd finally get into who was scheduling the appointments and finally get in. And actually I got in to speak to the senators and so on. Now the conversation went something like this. When I went to see Senator Kane, for example, he said, well, Dr. Garren, you used to grade your calculus class and your calculus exams. Why do you have a problem with the Department of Education grading your school? I said, Senator Kane, I remember taking those calculus exams home, opening them up, putting them on the dining room table. I had too many, so I had to take some of them, put them on the drain board in the kitchen, but I opened them all up and I mixed them up so I wouldn't know whose I was grading. And then I would go through that exam and I would grade one problem at a time to make sure that I was being fair and equitable to all my students. Senator Kane, you can't do that with 4,000 colleges. Conversation stopped. Went to another subject. Had the same conversation with Senator Warner. And with that one, I did not have a really good meeting when I went to see Senator Warner's meeting because the Chief of Staff, but several months before I had met I had not met him for the first time, but I had talked to Senator Warner at the night before the inauguration of our current Virginia governor. And I said, if this scorecard starts, please make sure that they do a test model project. We do that with all of our schools to make sure it works. So I had known him before, but when I came to meet him that day that I'd met Senator Kane, I got his chief of staff, which I did not have a pleasant conversation. I called down 2 days later and said, well, I want to know when Senator Warner is either going to be in Richmond or Roanoke or Lynchburg. I want 10 minutes with him. And I got a message back because I said, I don't think the person I was talking to really represents Senator Warner because I've known him for years. And I got a call back and they said, okay, he's going to call your house from his house. I said, I don't want anybody else on the telephone line. I said, okay, that's going to happen. So on one Tuesday, on a snowy day, he called me down, and the first few minutes were me explaining why that particular individual had not represented him properly. And so he said, okay. And then we talked about why what the Department of Education wanted to do would not work. And at first he said, you got to talk to Arnie Duncan, he's a smart guy. I said, I'm a professional mathematician. I don't care how smart Arnie Duncan is. He can't do what he says he's doing and do it in a fair manner. So then he talked on, he said, well, I really can't go against, the president and my own party. He says, but if you can come up with an alternate plan, I'll take it forward. I said, okay, I'll work on something. He said, can you have it next week? I said, I don't think I can have it quite that quickly. How about in a month? Well, as it turns out, he came to our area a few weeks after that and publicly stated that he had now decided he did not support the Department of Education scorecard. And they asked him in an interview afterwards, they asked him, well, when did you change your mind? He said, well, several weeks ago on a Saturday, I was talking with Lynchburg College. Well, it actually was a Tuesday, and I was Lynchburg College that had caused him to change. So based on his ability, Senator Warner, I was able to get in at that point, talk to the number 2 person in the Department of Education, Dr. Jamie Studley. At that day, in fact, the person who was going to be the number 2 person was being confirmed in Congress. So I had an hour of private conversation with her, and she would nod some when I would say, this is why I don't think your plan will work, and this is what you might want to do in place of it. That story didn't have a great ending because 7 days after I got back to Lynchburg College, we're having a Board of Trustees meeting, and I got a call from my financial aid officer. He said, she said, President Garren, we've just been called by the Department of Education, and they say they're going to come here and do a review of all of our records. I said, well, why is that? They said, well, they don't think we've been reviewed for a while. And so I immediately go to the telephone and call the Department of Education. Little Kenny G is not afraid of anybody or anything, and said, hey, what's going on? And I was told by a lady, she says, well, we don't think you've had one for a long time. I said, my financial aid officer says we've never been inspected by the Department of Education on our financial aid records. She said, well, I'll send you an email back and let you know. Well, she sent it back and let it know, and it still was. No, you've never had one, in fact, and no reason was ever given as to why they were coming. But they came, and in fact, they said, before they came, they said, here's a whole page full of documents we want before we get there. And after we get there, we're going to spend a week with you, and we're going to look over everything very carefully. I met them at the door, showed them my ID. When they came on campus, asked to see their ID, escorted them in, and they went through their business. They found some problems, some mistakes that had been made, and so that went on from there. So when I meet with people and say, if you think the people in the federal government will come after you and your institution if you push back on them, you may be wrong. You might be wrong.
Of course, now you've got a new opportunity in Washington, do you not?
There is a new opportunity.
And I wanted to make sure you got to talk about that because we've got about a minute and a half left.
Wow. Well, I know that I'm going to be able to get in and talk with the Secretary of Education due to my friendship with my neighbor, Jerry Falwell, who's the Chancellor of Liberty University. He's been appointed to 2 task forces. Our new Secretary of Education will realize she's not highly trained in higher education. I want to help train her. I want to let her know the role that the higher education, the independent higher education, in fact, can play in the national job that needs to be done. So I see this as an opportunity to make some changes. Also, I expect there's more regulations than we have to have. I think the Department of Education kind of overreached. I have a document here from Ball State University that talked about 11% of their operating budget is spent on compliance with federal documents. And I think there's going to be a good reason to take a look. And let's be reasonable. The same thing is true in the FAFSA reform. At one point, there was a desire by a Republican senator to make it a 2-question exam. I said, this is like me going to the doctor and saying, you're going to take my blood pressure and my cholesterol reading, and from that, you're going to assign the medicines that I can get. When you know you've only got a limited amount of medicine to give out, so let's do it wisely. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Take a look at that FAFSA reform, and I think they're doing that now. I think Senator Kane, last time I talked to him, indicated they were going to look at some simplifications. But I got a copy of the calculations that they do on the FAFSA reform, and I think it did a good job. It was a hard job, though, and I think a lot of people didn't apply to go to college because it was so difficult. And so I think simplifying is a good idea. But again, look for moderation. It's usually the best answer to do things.
Great. Well, thank you for being here, Dr. Kenneth Garren, President of Lynchburg College.
Woody, thanks for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you for watching this special edition of Cable Reports brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.